So today I'm having a conversation. I'm actually in New York City, and Ben Wolfe is the person with whom I'm having this conversation, and she is in Shanghai. And I think you're going to find this fascinating. Ben is somebody that I've known for several years, and her perspective on the world, since it really bridges both Asia and the West, should be really quite interesting. So, welcome to Conversation 360 podcast in this Asia and the West series, Ben.
Thanks, Susan.
So, let me start at the beginning, Ben. When we talk about conversations taking place between Asia and the West, what does that bring to mind to you? What does that mean?
Yeah, so when I hear that, I think first of all, I lived in the U.S. for a number of years, as you know, and now that I have lived here for a number of years. So when I hear that, there are a whole different things, bunch of things that come to mind. So first of all, I think there has been a genuine shift in the level of significance in Asia. So you find, I think, especially after the global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, I think Asia has become a much more central of a part of the global economy. And I think because of that, there is an increasing level of interest in people to understand what's going on in this part of the world, the business opportunities, the talent issues that we are looking to address, and also I think with that there is an increasing level of dialogue and understanding between the two coasts, if you will. So I have found that to be absolutely fascinating. And I also think, if I could add another point, is that, I would say you have certain segment of population who spend the entire time in one place. So you have a segment of people who spend a lot of time in the U.S. And then same with China. They spend a lot of time in China, mostly here. But I have found there's an increasing population of people who I would describe with a third culture, which is they actually experience both for all sorts of different reasons, whether it's education, whether it's work, whether it's social connection. So you have more and more people in the world that have a broader understanding of what happens in other parts of the world through their own experience, and I have found that to be really, really interesting.
So, do you think it's based on that reason that the dialogue has shifted over the last decade, Ben? It sounds like it might be a result very much of that more evidence of global citizenship.
I think there's definitely a big part of that. And I think also the way I see it is Asia has become even more relevant and more impactful to the business community as well as the political community. And I think we can see things play out in front of our eyes. And I think because of that, there is more and more people seeking experiences. I get a lot of inquiries and requests about people who are in the U.S., for example, who want to do a stint in this part of the world because now it's viewed as being cool. And when you look at a lot of universities, in the context of globalization, they have more structured programs, overseas programs, and a lot of those programs now have a segment in China. So I think it's for those reasons you have more and more understanding.
So that leads me to a question about. I mean, you obviously have a global reputation now, and a finger on the pulse of employment issues, specifically how to attract, manage, and retain talent in the Asia Pacific region. So it sounds like you're saying that for people in the West, there's an increased interest in working in that part of the world. What about? I think you've told me, in fact, that in that mainland China is the second most favored that EY is the second most favored employer in mainland China. Did I get that right? That's pretty amazing.
Yes. So there is an organization called Universum. They survey, hundreds of thousands of students around the world, and based on the feedback, they rank organizations as the most attractive employer. And for mainland China, EY, for last year, we are the second most favored employer. Next to Alibaba, they are the number one favorite employer in mainland China. So it's something we feel very proud of. And talent is such a big issue. I mean, it's a big issue everywhere, but it's really a big issue here in Asia because there's a strong recognition that our success is so much dependent on the level of talent we're able to attract and retain and engage.
So
we're very proud of that.
Yeah, okay, so I would think that one of the things that's on the mind of a lot of people who are interested in China is the recent downturn in the Chinese economy. What impact did that have on your business, if at all? And did it impact at all the attractiveness or the willingness or the excitement of people about working in that part of the world?
I think it certainly impacted, the businesses everywhere. But I would have to say, in terms of our specific business, we continue to do really well. And in fact, I would say we are doing so much better today than we were in several years ago. So that's really good news for us. We actually continue to attract really, really top-notch people, and over the years, we have made tremendous progress in our own attractiveness. And really position ourselves as employer of choice. And as we just mentioned, that certainly has had a really positive impact on our brand in the marketplace as an employer. So that's been great, and that's been really helpful in our ability to attract top talent.
So, Ben, I was just going to ask you, how accurate is the Chinese understanding of the West?
Actually, really good. I would say it's really pretty accurate. What's really interesting to me, Susan, is that the people here, or at least a certain segment of the population here, they have such good understanding of what happens in the rest of the world. In comparison, I actually would dare say that much better than their counterparts in different countries like the U.S. So you are able to walk into a movie theater and see an American movie, a pretty recent one. And I don't, and a lot of people do it, sometimes with subtitles and all of that. But the point I'm making is it does happen. They understand the culture, they understand what's going on, and so I actually, and definitely through social media, there's a lot going on. So, of course, there's always a filter in terms of how things get discussed, and I have found that happens everywhere. But I think overall, people really have a good understanding as to what happens in the West, particularly in the U.S., I would say.
So the other way around is not so much. The Western understanding of Asia, specifically of China, is really much less sophisticated.
I would think so. I actually think when you look at the people here, they get significantly more of the exposure in the West. And so I would actually say one of the things I talk to people here about is we actually really have an advantage in that, a lot of the U.S., if you are talking about the graduates in a very traditional sense, you have a lot of people in the U.S. They know the U.S. really well, but that's really their experience. But and yes, they read on the news and they hear things about Asia or about China. But I actually think that the other side is I think China. Uh, Younger people, they not only they know China extremely well, but they also know the West really well. So that actually, in my opinion, that gives them a real advantage.
But yeah, it would seem to me that it would. Now, how about those individuals you're talking about, and we talk about millennials, who are people that have been
Yeah.
living in a country where growth has really been exponential. Has the recent downturn affected their mood at all? Is there any impact of that on them, or is it still, are their anticipations, their expectations still high?
No, it definitely has made a difference. So I use analogy, with the financial crisis. I use analogy vis-a-vis China as like your first breakup. Right? Broke up with your
Uh-huh.
first love. Before that, there was such a go, everything was on the up and up, double digit increases in GDP, all of that. People only knew one way, which is up. And I think the financial crisis that really set a reality into people's head in terms of, what, um, it's that's not that was not the real world, so to speak. That wasn't the reality. The reality is there are going to be things that are going to be slower, and there's a different set of expectations that's being set. So I do think people are more realistic in my mind in terms of what they can expect and what they should expect. So I think definitely there is more of a sense in terms of the value in stability and security. And also, I think, and I know there's quite a bit of discussion out there in terms of the fact that China has produced significantly more college graduates in recent years ever than it had historically. So, in terms of expectations of college graduates, once upon a time, you know, the fact that you went to college and you graduated, that almost guaranteed you a really upper echelon type of employment. Whereas now, that market is really, really competitive, and you have, a lot of graduates who struggle to find the job that they believe they deserve, having had a college education. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic as China continue to pump out more university graduates.
Now, some say as a result of this downturn or whatever else may be at play that some of China's brightest and wealthiest are actually leaving the country. Do you see that?
Um, what I see is that there is more and more desire uh, to get a Western education. So you have a lot of people who would graduate from high school and they would go to the West for an education. And I think there's even more number. They would actually send their kids out in high school, and in the hope that they will position them better in university enrollment and all of that. I think in part there is a recognition, and that's my opinion. In part, I think there's a recognition that there's such a difference in the way the Chinese education works and the Western education works, and I think you read a lot about that, and there is a recognition that the education in the Western style that really it's more holistic. It's less focused on routine learning, but a lot more in terms of independent thinking, critical thinking, and it develops individuality. And I think there is a much greater level of appreciation in a segment of our population here to really want their children to develop that aspect. I think that's a big part of it. But at the same time, I also see a lot of people coming back after their education because they actually feel like they can get the best of both worlds in China. So, and of course, you have individuals who want to continue on in the West, in the U.S., but you also have an increasing number of people wanting to come back and and start their business, and just really see a lot of market opportunities. And I would say, in spite of all the reporting in terms of the China economy slowdown, and I think there is definitely an element of that, I still think there are tons of opportunities here, just because the development is still very much on the up and up.
So when we talk about, you mentioned Alibaba, we know that Alibaba and other companies are truly being regarded as highly, and
Yeah.
obviously that's important because it's necessary for continue to be on a growth trajectory that it has made very clear it's accomplished. So where is you mentioned the educational system, something that doesn't exactly promote and all assumed was important. So where is all this innovation coming from in China? Is it coming from, certainly not expats anymore? That's sort of no longer the name of ropes. And could it be that it is from all these kids that are being arrested and coming back and then sharing that thing? Or is it home, despite the fact that it would somehow out all these graduates? Where's it coming from?
I think it's really a combination of things, Susan. I think there is definitely the exposure visibility to what happens in the world. I do think as when you look at the population here, and when you look at the young people growing up, they are incredibly well educated in terms of understanding the fundamentals and really understanding the theories and how things actually work. I actually, and my opinion is that couples with a real curiosity and wanting to understand what actually happens outside. You have a segment of that population who actually are very good about taking different bits and putting it together. Even though I do think the education here is much more routine, and but it does teach you such a strong foundation in terms of understanding how things work and the different subjects. And so I think it's a real combination of things. If I have to put one thing, which I'm not sure if that's even fair, but I actually think with the rigorous education system here and an increasing visibility and exposure to how things are done elsewhere, and a lot of and also the ease of building network through social media these days, I actually think it gives some people a real nice advantage to to be entrepreneurial. It's not for everybody, obviously. It's never for everybody, but I think you see a lot of innovation happening in this part of the world, and it's really exciting.
So it sounds as if you're pretty bullish about China's future. Is that look at the young and how they are ambitious, have high expectations, are well educated? Is that the source of your optimism? What else may sense that? Right.
My optimism comes from the fact that China is continue to be connected with, with the rest of the world. And I think that would be a very important premise. As long as China continues to be a, a very key member of the global community, and as well as there is connectivity and exchange of information and all of that, I am extremely positive on where China is going. So I think one of the things that's going to be interesting is just to see with the environment we are in today, just to see how this continues to go.
And
I think that is interesting.
so, been
Go ahead.
looking at it the other direction. What are the major challenges? What could throw a wrench into this? What are China's?
Yeah, I think one of the major challenges has to do with, it's the opposite of what I just said. My concern would be an increasing level of nationalism. And I also, I know we weren't going to get into politics, but it sort of have to come into play in that when you look around the world today, there is an increasing sense of nationalism everywhere. And I make the distinction between, and I heard somebody say that and really resonated with me. You distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. And in my mind, I think being a sense of patriotic, and I think a lot of Chinese people, most of Chinese people, especially younger people, they're very patriotic, and I think that's fantastic. But I think we go down the path of nationalism, I think that would, that would cause concern because that means the walls go up, literally or figuratively, and that narrows the thinking, and that would not serve well. And I think there needs to be recognition that China is not alone. And it also I think that the geopolitical landscape is going to play is going to have a major impact on how things play out.
I one of the questions I'd love to ask you is, know that uh, recently that Alibaba purchased the South China Morning Post, and what 100 mouthpiece out of home, and has now installed a new CEO who's
Mm.
mostly a techie, so that we can think of it as a real effort to journalistic organization that has a high degree. I'm curious about what your thoughts are in the ability of CMPs, people real independence, or whether, as you were talking about, how you want to ensure that China doesn't become too nationalistic and that continues to have this exchange of conversation with. Does that do people talk about that at all? That the fact that Alibaba owns the South China, a mainland China
Not
mouthpiece,
much,
or doesn't that
actually.
get
And I guess
discussed?
the first thing I would say is Alibaba is it's a very, it's a it's an MNC, right? Multinational company. And I actually, interesting, yes, Alibaba's headquarters is in mainland China, no doubt. But I actually don't see Alibaba as a mainland company. I see Alibaba as an international company. Just happens to headquartered in mainland China. So I mean, I think that's really interesting. That I don't think it that way because I see how global it is. I haven't heard much discussion around that impact on SCMP. I read SCMP on a regular basis, and I haven't noticed any change in the way it reports. So so that would be interesting to see. Um, whether
Yeah, pretty new, so we'll see what happens
Right.
because this new CEO is literally, but kind of fascinating to watch. Are there other issues? One of the things you said we had talked before was that when we were mentioning conversations shifting between us, that you mentioned that within China alone, in the last decade, that number of dialects, the way people have their own become done Mandarin way that is the same similarity all throughout the country. Do I have that right? Because
Yeah.
I think that's a
So yeah, I
fascinating
did mention. So
comment.
I grew up here in mainland China, in Shanghai, in the 60s and 70s, and and we learned Mandarin as as we were coming up the school system, and one of the things that the government at that point really focused on was to use language as a way to unite China, and really making sure that Mandarin is the language that everybody speaks. And for those who are, and I know you know that, but for those who don't, the dialect in China, we have all sorts of dialect, and it's really very, very different. It's certainly different from a New York accent versus an accent from the South, for example, in the U.S. context. Literally, you don't even understand each other if you are in different part of the world. So they've really made an effort to push for, Mandarin speaking as a way to really unite the entire country. And now coming back here nearly 30 years later, that was one of the most significant things that I noticed. That the default language on the streets of Shanghai is Mandarin. In fact, I will tell you so much so that there was some concern that for a place like Shanghai or other places, we don't want to lose our own heritage, that the nuances that the language brings. So I think right now there is an effort to really wanting to make sure we maintain that as well. But that's really, really interesting, and it's really remarkable when you think about that. In fact, when I look at how much things have changed during the time that I wasn't here, it's really impressive as to what people were able to achieve.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think, any other issues that you think are important about Asia and the West and what's happening more connected?
Not particularly. I just think as long as we always look to understand each other, and that's where I find my own background and my own experiences have been helpful, because I did live in the U.S. for a number of years. But in the core, I grew up in China, and I'm back here, so I do feel like there is a good appreciation of both, and I think you know as long as we have more and more people who are able to build that bridge, I think it's going to be fantastic. And going back to my other comment, I think for me the risk is the walls go up. I think that and in my opinion, that would truly be going backwards, and that wouldn't be good.
It's interesting. If we just had a global exchange program, so every citizen in some other country, a couple of years, we probably would find I just find that ability to uh, have an experience out of your to experience things change.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. And yeah, no, absolutely. From my own perspective, Susan, I always thought, so I spent 17 years in China. Then I went to the U.S., went to university, ended up staying much longer than I ever thought I would, and got married, had kids. When I was in the U.S. before I came back, I always saw myself as somebody who appreciated, diverse perspectives. I was open-minded. I, I had a good sense as to different points of views. But when I came back, one thing that really surprised me is how many assumptions that I made about different things, about how business worked, about how how people went about doing their things. That was a real good lesson for me personally, and to your point, that has given me a whole different level of understanding. Not only it's been not only helpful for me professionally, but also personally, and really understand, not to judge things, but really trying to understand why things are the way they are. And I think if we had a lot more of that, the world would be a better place.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that, of course, that's one of the purposes of having these conversations is to give some other people an opportunity having exactly the kind of or how that works and how they can. So I really thank you for this conversation, Ben. It's been terrific, and uh, participating in Conversation 360 and this Asia and the West podcast.
Thanks, Susan.
Terrific. Thank you so much.